Modern farming removed the crops that kept humans alive. If medieval farmers had relied on modern grains, many of them would have starved. The grains that kept medieval people alive no longer dominate our fields, not because they failed, but because modern systems forced them out. Their fields were filled with crops that could survive drought, frost, poor soil, and neglect. These grains fed entire kingdoms for centuries without chemicals, irrigation systems, or genetic modification. And yet, most of them are gone, not because they failed, but because modern farming engineered them out for profit and efficiency. What medieval people grew was not primitive food. It was survival food, and modern agriculture quietly erased it. Why medieval farmers chose resilient grains over high yields. Medieval farming was not about maximizing profit. It was about not starving to death. A single failed harvest could wipe out an entire village. So farmers chose grains that could endure brutal winters, sudden floods, and long dry seasons. These grains were slower to grow and harder to process, but they rarely failed completely. During medieval famines, villages that planted mixed grains often survived when neighboring fields failed. When wheat collapsed under frost or disease, rye, barley, or millet still produced food. In monocrop fields, failure was total. Survival came down to what had been planted years earlier. Modern farming flipped this logic and made our food system far more fragile. Today's system values speed, uniformity, and transport efficiency above all else. Grains that ripen at the same time and look identical are easier to machine harvest and sell globally. This is why a single disease or climate shock can now threaten food supplies across entire countries. Medieval grains did not fit that system, so they were abandoned even though they were stronger, more nutritious, and more reliable. Emmer wheat and the backbone of medieval bread. Emmer wheat was one of the oldest grains still widely grown in medieval Europe. It thrived in rocky soil where modern wheat struggles and resisted many of the fungal diseases that plague today's crops. Medieval bread made from emmer was dense, dark, and filling. It digested slowly and kept people full for hours, which mattered when meals were scarce. Modern wheat breeding removed these traits to make bread lighter and softer, but in doing so stripped away much of its nutritional complexity. Emmer disappeared because it did not suit industrial milling. Its tough husk required more labor to remove, and modern systems had no patience for that. What was lost was a grain that naturally regulated blood sugar and supported long-term energy. Einkorn, and the grain modern science cannot improve einkorn wheat, is a genetic relic from the ancient world that medieval farmers still relied on. Unlike modern wheat, einkorn has never been hybridized. It contains a simpler gluten structure and far fewer chromosomes, making it easier for many people to digest. Medieval populations did not suffer from the widespread grain sensitivities common today, not because they were stronger, but because their grains were different. Einkorn yields less grain per acre, which made it undesirable once agriculture became profit-driven. Modern farming discarded it because it could not be pushed harder with fertilizers and chemicals. Ironically, einkorn thrives without them. It survives where modern wheat collapses, but efficiency metrics labeled it obsolete. Spelt, and the grain that survived the coldest fields. Spelt was one of the toughest grains medieval farmers relied on, especially in the cold, damp regions of northern Europe where modern wheat struggles to survive. What made spelt unique was its thick outer husk, which acted like natural armor. This husk protected the grain from frost, insects, mold, and even long periods of storage in damp barns. Medieval farmers understood that protection mattered more than speed. A crop that survived winter was worth more than one that yielded slightly more, but failed under stress. Spelt fields continued producing food year after year with little intervention, even when weather turned hostile. The same husk that made spelt so reliable is also the reason modern farming abandoned it. Industrial milling systems dislike anything that slows processing, and spelt requires an extra step to remove its protective shell. In choosing efficiency over resilience, modern agriculture discarded a grain that had already proven it could endure conditions many modern crops cannot survive today. Rye and the grain that saved lives during famine. Rye was the ultimate medieval survival grain. It grew in poor soil, tolerated freezing temperatures, and still produced food when wheat failed completely. In many medieval famines, rye was the difference between survival and death. Rye bread was heavy, sour, and deeply nourishing. It fermented naturally, which improved digestion and preservation. Modern agriculture pushed rye aside because its lower yield and strong flavor did not suit mass markets. What replaced it was white bread that spoils faster and offers less nutritional value. Medieval people understood that food was fuel, not a luxury product. Rye fed generations through conditions modern crops would never survive. Barley and the forgotten foundation of medieval diets, barley was everywhere in the medieval world. It fed humans, animals, and entire brewing cultures. It grew quickly, tolerated drought, and restored soil health when rotated properly. Medieval farmers relied on barley porridge, bread, and ale as daily staples. Barley's soluble fiber supported gut health long before science understood digestion. Modern farming relegated barley mostly to animal feed and alcohol production because it does not produce the fluffy white bread consumers expect. The grain did not fail humanity. Humanity abandoned it for aesthetics and convenience. Millet and the grain. That modern farming ignored millet was common in medieval diets across Europe, Asia, and parts of Africa. It required little water, grew in poor soil, and matured rapidly. These traits made it ideal for unpredictable climates. Modern agriculture ignored millet because it does not fit global commodity markets. Its small seeds and varied species complicate mechanized harvesting. Medieval farmers saw flexibility as strength. Modern systems see it as inefficiency. As climate instability increases, millet quietly proves it was never outdated, only overlooked. Why these grains disappeared? All at once. The disappearance of medieval grains was not accidental. It happened rapidly with the rise of industrial agriculture. Machines demanded uniform crops. Global trade demanded predictability. Chemical fertilizers rewarded plants bred for speed rather than resilience. Grains that could not be standardized were eliminated regardless of their nutritional or ecological value. Medieval grains were designed by nature to survive stress. Modern grains are designed to perform under perfect conditions that rarely exist outside controlled systems. What modern farming lost when it destroyed these crops by replacing resilient grains with fragile monocultures, modern farming traded stability for output. Medieval fields contained genetic diversity that acted as insurance against disease and climate shifts. Today's fields are vast and uniform, making them vulnerable to single points of failure. Medieval grains supported soil health through deep root systems and natural rotations. Modern grains exhaust the land and require constant intervention. What was lost was not just food, but an entire agricultural philosophy built around survival rather than profit. Why scientists are now trying to recover medieval grains. Ironically, Modern science is now scrambling to reintroduce many of these grains. Researchers recognize that climate change is making industrial farming increasingly unstable. Einkorn, emmer, spelt, rye, barley, and millet are being studied again because they tolerate stress better than modern crops. The knowledge medieval farmers held through experience is being rediscovered through data. These grains were never inferior. They were simply incompatible with an economic system that valued short-term efficiency over long-term survival. Medieval farmers did not see land as a factory. They saw it as a living system that demanded respect. Their grains were slow, stubborn, and resilient because survival demanded it. Modern farming removed those traits in pursuit of convenience and now faces a future of fragile food systems. The grains medieval people relied on were not destroyed by failure. They were destroyed by success in the wrong direction. Perhaps the past was not holding humanity back. Perhaps it was quietly keeping us alive.